Welcome to our LB's The Lover of Books author chat. If this is your first time here or watching a recording, so glad you found us and welcome. I've had the honor to interview over 60 debut to best-selling authors, and readers like you have helped me along the way with my YouTube channel and just attending all these author chats. We have amassed over 15,000 hours watched on that YouTube channel. So my guess is you're going to find a book you've already read, go back, watch that author chat. That book will stay with you so much longer, just hearing what that author has to say. But I so appreciate you taking the time to like, comment, let me know what you think. A lot of the authors will come back and see, like, they love interacting as well. So please drop those comments. But we are here for our first 2025 author chat, and I am so excited to kick it off with Rufi Thorpe. I'm just thrilled that she agreed to be our first author, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce her. She received her MFA from the University of Virginia, not too far from me. She's the author of 4 novels, and they are Corona Del Mar, Dear Fang with Love, The Knockout Queen, and which was a finalist for the Faulkner Award. But what we're here tonight to discuss is her newest, which is Margo's Got Money Troubles. That's about to be, I'm sure you may already know this, David E. Kelley's Apple TV series starring none other than Nicole Kidman, Michelle Pfeiffer, Elle Fanning, and more. And you may not know this, but if you listen to the audiobook, that was Elle Fanning, which she's amazing, like really, really amazing. And I'm so excited that she's doing this. Rufi lives in California with her husband and 2 sons. And I saw a really cute dog on your website as well.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I have the most badly behaved and lovable bull terrier named Coco.
Perfect. Well, I love that the photo was front and center there because I love seeing pictures of pups. Well, let's just go ahead and get right into this. You wrote in the book, you're turning tragedy into carnival. So, what did you mean by that, and why did you want to kick it off with it?
First of all, thank you so much for just having me here. This is like the funnest conversations that I get to do. So I think she's talking about her boss at the restaurant, that turning tragedy into carnival was kind of her thing. Um, and I mean, that particular restaurant owner was very kind of based on, I worked as a waitress for, over a decade. And that kind of restaurant owner is just very I always preferred to like work at privately owned instead of corporate chain restaurants when I could, because A, the tips were better and it's a better working environment. But so that kind of personality really makes sense to me. But I really think that it's also just true. I think you're either life strikes you as funny or it doesn't. And it took me a long time to understand that I was kind of a comedic novelist and that my strength was always going to be when I was being funny. But I also overthink everything. And so then I was like, how does one be funny? What is humor about? And I spent like a long time intellectually trying to understand humor. And what it came to for me was that like what really makes something funny is blurting out the thing that everyone is afraid to say, that everyone agrees is true, but you're not supposed to say. And I think that that's part of why, I don't know, do you guys ever like get the giggles? Like I can remember always getting the giggles like every time I've ever been in the ER in a serious situation. Or like me and my mom at the mortuary when my grandmother had passed got the giggles so bad, and like we were so embarrassed with in front of the lady, and we're like, no, we loved her so much. It's just there's something about this. She's like, no, this happens all the time. And so I do think that there is something about that in a novel, humor kind of leavens it so that you can stand to talk about the really dark material. And so I find it useful in that way. But I also think that like life is absurd in a lot of ways, and it strikes me as funny, and that's just like maybe a part of my nature that is then part of how I make art.
So, how did you come across Margo? Like, how did she evolve in your brain
For me.
and come to us?
So like it started in a really abstract place, like a really long time ago, actually. I was seeing the movie Wonder Woman in theaters with my mother, which was what, like, I think it came out in like 2017, maybe. And we were both agreeing we really liked the whole like island and the Amazons and like, but we didn't actually like Wonder Woman herself because she was sort of cold and virginal. And we were like, why can't there be like a female superhero who fucks, you know? Like you have Black Widow, but she's so tortured about it. And like, why can't there just be like a healthily sexual, powerful female superhero? And just thinking about that, I had this idea of trying to make a Madonna whore character. Like the Madonna whore complex, right? Is that like every woman is either a Madonna or a whore, and that our culture like wants to sort women into those two categories. And I was like, what would happen if I made a character who was a great mom and a great sex worker? Like, is it possible? Would she explode? Could such a book even be written? And I was like, oh, I don't know how I would do it because we put mothers on such a pedestal. And the cultural stigma against sex work is just so strong that I was like, I'll never be able to get the reader to root for her. And then it was really in the beginning of the pandemic. I was following several stand-up comics on Twitter, and their whole ability to make a living from stand-up was suddenly gone with the lockdown. And so two of these girls started OnlyFans accounts and were kind of live tweeting their journey of doing it. And obviously trying to turn their Twitter following into a customer base. And I was like, I just noticed that the conversation around OnlyFans was a little bit different. And I think it appeals to a broader swath of women because it like most women, I think at this point have taken nudes for a partner or even just to be curious what they look like naked. You know, everyone has a camera in their phone and has taken nude photos at some point now. And then everybody sold something online. And so the idea of selling nudes online is just not as intimidating as, for instance, like going and auditioning at a strip club where you're like, what do I wear? Do I know how to dance? I don't know how to do it. Will the people be scary? You know, there's just more barriers to entry. And so I just felt like it was a much more relatable way of writing a sex work adjacent kind of character. And so it really started from that like abstract place. But then I think I found Margot's voice kind of through that relationship with Mark in the beginning. I kept wanting to write. I originally wanted the book to be about the business that she and JB start at the end. But I kept being like, no, 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 with a superhero, you have to find out her origin story. Like, you have to find out how she gets to be this badass. Like,
Right.
you can't just take it on faith that she's this badass. Like, you need to see how she becomes a badass. And then I was like, oh, I'm writing about the mechanics of female empowerment. I'm writing about how you get to that point where you trust your judgment over other people's judgment, you know? And because when she steps outside the good opinion of others, she can't use that good being in everyone's good graces as her moral compass. She has to develop her own sense of right and wrong. And that's like where real empowerment, I think, comes from. So so I kept going back and back in time. And it was, I think like the moments that I found her as a character were like the moment where Mark starts talking like a little old lady, and like understanding like their dynamic. And then that moment where she says like that she has secrets from herself, like that she didn't really like him and that that secret was like waiting inside herself to be like found. And so I feel like that's how she kind of came alive to me as a character, was when I was first writing that relationship.
Well, you brought up a lot of points that I'm going to follow up on. One of which is the negative connotation that society has on sex workers, but also on women in general with any sort of sexuality. So after seeing Wonder Woman, obviously that's when it hit you. What did your mother think? Like, was the difference in generation the same, or was it a different take? Did y'all discuss that? Because I'm just curious, like, was it a different
Yeah, I
progression?
mean, I don't know. So my mom she was born in like 56. So a lot of her upbringing was like free love in the 60s and 70s. But there was always this awareness that like you were supposed to be sexually liberated, but also you would be harshly judged if you were actually sexually liberated. You
Mhm.
know, that you had to kind of like act like you could have sex like a man, but you definitely could not do that or you would lose all like love and respect. And so I think that she was very aware of that contradiction in her own life. And then also she raised me as a single mother. Like I was from a one night stand basically. And at that time she was 28 and I think just realized that she probably wasn't going to get the whole like happily ever after, get married and have kids. And if she was going to have a kid, maybe it would be me. And so even though she didn't have a partner, she just decided to keep me. And she'd had other abortions previously. So it wasn't that she was against abortion. But so I think that a lot of this book was actually lessons that I learned from my mother. And there's nothing that'll make you think about your mother differently and in a new light than having kids of your own. I think that you can't really understand how much your mother loved you or how much she did for you, just how much butt wiping went on. You know what I mean? How much sacrificing, how many lonely hours, how many, flus and stomach bugs and doctor's notes. And I mean, just the sheer amount of labor that goes into every single child on this earth is staggering. And so I think that for me, having my own kids and coming to understand how lonely it must have been for my mom to not have not only anybody to lean on in the hard times, but no one to share the joy with. I mean, it is impossibly joyful to raise a child and to not have somebody else to be like, look at how cute, look, can you believe she just took her first steps, to like not have anyone to share those things with. So like there's a lot of my mom in this book. I'm sure, I think my mom has more stigma against sex work than I do, but I ran into my own stigma. I thought like, oh, I'm so liberal, I don't have any stigma against sex work, but I ran into it as I was writing, and I really like needed to unpack some things about how I thought about it. You know, and I read, if anyone's interested in just thinking about sex work more, there's a wonderful book called Revolting Prostitutes, with like the double meaning of revolting, and written by two sex workers. And it's such an intelligent and insightful analysis of like the sort of philosophical underpinnings behind sex work, and then also a really comprehensive understanding of like the state of sex work in society today, and like Sesta Fosta and the situation that put modern sex workers in and all that. So I highly recommend that book.
Well, you gave a distinction and you chose OnlyFans because I believe they have more control. It sounds like they're making the shots, they're saying exactly what they want to do and how far they
Who they
want.
want to work with, all the money is theirs. I mean, OnlyFans takes its cut, obviously, but it's a lot different than, being in a porn in exchange for drugs. It's a much more empowered position. And in the same way that like YouTube has brought about a democratization in media and video making and allowing so many people to basically become amateur documentarians that would never have been able to have a career that way otherwise. I feel like ultimately in the ecosystem of porn, OnlyFans is a really empowering, positive development for women.
You did decide though to post, have this book's timeline be back a little bit farther. It's not modern day right now. It did happen a bit ago. Was that because you had all the information on how OnlyFans was working at that time, or law, or I mean, why did you set it then?
Well, okay, so partially because um I so part of it is that book timelines, like pipelines for publishing a book, are really long. So from the time I wrote it to the time, it took me a year and a half to 2 years to write it. And then from the time I wrote it to the time we sold it was almost another year, because I wound up switching agents and switching publishing houses, and it was a long process. And then from the time I sold it to the time it comes out is a year. So I started writing this book in 2020. And I couldn't have projected it. It is always really scary when you're writing. You try and set things like 2 or 3 years ahead so that it'll be like present day when it gets published. But with things like COVID and really consequential presidential elections, that gets much harder to do. And so I just didn't want to set this book during COVID. And so I needed like at least a year where we were safely not going to hit 2020.
Yeah.
And so I kind of settled on, and then also the more I understood it, like the kinds of techniques that Margo's doing in terms of using TikTok to support her OnlyFans, and many accounts, like most accounts now do that. And so I thought, wouldn't it be so cool if she could be kind of part of one of the pioneers of making it work that way? And so I chose to set it in the near past, kind of for that whole cluster of reasons.
No,
But
I,
it's actually
I like.
really hard to find OnlyFans girls who were on it during that period. And so I mainly was only interviewing girls that were on like 2020 and later because that's who I could find. And so I'm sure there are inaccuracies in terms of like the back end and like little technical things because I really couldn't find anyone from that time period who was willing to talk to me for not insane amounts of money. And that's the thing is that the research for this book was very expensive.
So have they reached out to you after this? Like, has anybody come to you and been like, yeah, that's my experience, or not really?
Yeah, we had there was one ex sex worker who I can think of who was I don't think she actually did OnlyFans. She was on different cam sites. And but kind of pre OnlyFans days and she was like I cannot even describe like I've never seen sex work treated this like humanely kind of and this like accurately like this definitely describes my experience. The main feedback like the main place because I had a one OnlyFans model read the whole manuscript before it was published and incorporated her feedback. And the main thing that she felt was unrealistic was the idea of ever dating one of your fans, which I take, and I think that that's true. But also, I was pretty set on the plot point, and I figure she's just starting doing it. But how difficult it was to get really good feedback from models in terms of like anytime. So I found it pretty easy to get girls to talk to me about the money, the business, the marketing, the mechanics of doing it all, but anything that veered into the personal, like even what I considered to be really open-ended questions, like how do you feel like your feelings about doing this work are different now than when you first started? Like something really open-ended like that. They'd be like, I don't feel comfortable answering that, babe. Just like no, that's not, you're not. And if you think about how many people are constantly trying to get at them, trying
Right.
to get something more from them, trying to get something intimate from them, I mean, you will not find people with better boundaries than sex workers. And I mean, I came away really respecting it, but it also meant that I didn't want to set it in a period where she had been doing this for some years because I didn't feel like I had an accurate understanding of what doing this for years does to you psychologically. Um,
Mhm.
and I didn't want to take liberties and get it wrong. Whereas I could kind of imagine myself into it and encountering all this and starting out and where my instincts would be wrong. Like I could more imagine starting it, but I didn't feel like I really understood deeply what it means to do this for a number of years.
Well, you did mention the magic year 2020 that we all have permanently, implanted in our head. And so much of this book, I feel like, is themed around loneliness. Did that help put you in that character into this book, into that plot line?
I mean, I think certainly, I think that the pandemic played a role in it, in that it was a return. I mean, having a newborn is a lot like being in quarantine. You're kind of just like endlessly inside the house. It's part of why I didn't want her to hit the quarantine because I already was having it to, they were already in the apartment so much that if they were never allowed to leave, like this book would be suffocating. Like it would be so claustrophobic. And I really wanted her to be able to like meet people and make friends and for there to just be other places that scenes could take place. But I think that for me, that return to the claustrophobia that I remember so well from when my kids are older now. My kids are 9 and 12. And so now my life is very easy and they're very self-sufficient and it's easy to forget kind of how claustrophobic in both positive magical ways and negative you feel like you're going to die if you can just have 5 minutes with no one touching you. But I feel like the pandemic has some of that similar, like endless dream time, nowhere to go, like reality is kind of plastic. And for me, I'm the one without like a real job. Like my husband, my husband has like a much more important job. So I was the one in charge of Zoom kindergarten and stuff. My kids were like 4 and 7 when the pandemic started. And so I think that for me, supervising Zoom kindergarten and then having like OnlyFans open on my computer doing research, like it made me feel like I was still part of the adult world. Like I wasn't going to get totally just like sucked into only being mommy, you know? And so I think writing about something mildly subversive helped me during the pandemic feel like a whole person and like I wasn't just a mother kind of.
But I loved how Margo even translates loneliness into her relationship with her dad when she finds him high, because she even says that dealing with a drunk or someone high is as lonely as dealing with a baby. And so
Oh,
she
yeah.
also has that aspect going on. And so I don't know, there was just so many
There's
aspects.
a lot. I mean, she talks about like the loneliness of like when she first gets Bodhi home from the hospital and she feels like she could be in a space station. Like she's like feels that alone with him. Or even like thinking about like Jinx, his whole reason that he cheats constantly is because he gets lonely when he's on the road and like he doesn't want to go out and do coke with a bunch of wrestlers. He wants to cuddle a redhead with soft boobs, you know? And hear all about her life and like have some sort of intimacy. Like, I feel like loneliness is a very key part of the human experience. And like, I feel like we all are searching, like, you know, Sartre said, hell is other people. Like, all our problems come from other people, you know, like that's where all the complications begin. And yet, like, we can't live without people. We're such deeply social animals.
Yeah, it seems like it's just loneliness is so much the root cause of a lot, including like his addiction, and it's why he always tends to go back to it. But it's just, I don't know. I thought that was an important one going throughout. But I think it's also important that Margo sort of finds that she does need that connection beyond, but she also discovers the love for herself. And so I think that's an important journey for her. And would you consider this a coming of age book?
Yeah, I think it's a coming of age for sure. I think it's a particularly female coming of age, but I also think that it's her, like, we had a lot of different alternate titles. When I was writing it, the manuscript on my computer was just called Hungry Ghost, but I knew it could never be sold that way because people would think it was a ghost story and it would be confusing. It would just set up like the wrong readerly expectations. And so I knew the title would have to change. And for a while it was called Milk Money, but I think that that was like a 90s movie with Emily Griffith in it. And then we went with Margo's Got Money Troubles. But one of the titles that I proposed that everyone vetoed was Portrait of the Artist as a Young Sex Worker. And I do think that this is also about her like discovering herself as an artist and as a writer and as a creator. And as um, yeah, as someone, I feel like it's about empowerment in all these ways. And for me, like motherhood was sort of a big surprise, in the sense that I got pregnant by accident when I was 26, which is really, really different than getting pregnant by accident when you're 19. But I also, didn't we were like grad students. I didn't have any money. None of my friends had kids yet. I'd never held a baby until I held my own because I didn't have any siblings or any, cousins that we were close. I just hadn't grown up around other kids. And so, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't really have, it wasn't like, oh, now this is the right time in my life, so I'm going to get pregnant on purpose. It was like I was sort of thrust into it, and I didn't have a lot of mental images of what motherhood would be like, except for that it would be really, really hard, and I would never sleep, and, all these things. And so I really wasn't prepared I just wasn't anticipating how positive it was going to be and how empowering. And especially as someone who wasn't very assertive and had a difficult time saying no, there's really nothing that can teach you about to be comfortable saying no than having two little boys. You get very good at it. I'll yell at children that aren't even mine at the park. Like it really. You're like, we don't throw rocks. You set that down. No, like you get very assertive, and so there were so many parts of motherhood that I found personally empowering that I just wasn't expecting. And so I also wanted to get to write about that.
So did part of you bleed into Margo then? Because she sort of discovers that love for hers, for Bodhi as well. Like she wasn't anticipating any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the trick is for you make all of the characters out of yourself, because you don't really have anything else to make stuff up out of. I only have my own life experience, and that can include observations I've made about other people, or it can include like my own experiences. But I think that I did put a lot of my own motherhood experience into Margot, in part because it's the motherhood experience that I know the most intimately. And I think that, that realization that she has, that the important part is not being loved, but loving others, that's where the power and the restoration and the heart's ease comes from. That's what ends the loneliness, is truly loving other people, not being loved correctly by somebody else. That is definitely a real psycho spiritual journey that characterized my own 20s. I think it's like, what's fictional is expecting a 19-year-old to handle all of this as well as Margot does. I feel like an actual real life 19-year-old would be much stupider and make worse decisions than Margot does.
Well, I loved when you said that one of her greatest lessons was that, like you said, where does love come from? But it's not from the crumbs of others. And for me, that was such a visual that she now has realized that when she gives love, that's it for her. And I loved it. I mean, you talked about so many big issues. You talked about the concept of deserving happiness, which is something I think a lot of people wrestle, how that's funny, grass with. But then also the part about what is art, and I think that's one of my all-time favorite lines. What is art? One person trying to get another person they have never met to fall in love with them. And that one has really stuck with me. Is that sort of a when you approach a book, is that what you think about as well?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think that, okay, so there's this um a sort of major figure in writing life, Gordon Lish, who was Raymond Carver's editor, and he was this sort of very formative figure in the literary world because he was a writing teacher, and he was for a long time an editor at, I think, Esquire and then the New Yorker, or maybe just Esquire. And then also he had his own imprint at Knopf, which is a publishing house. So imagine if your teacher could also get you a book deal, right? So it was this a fucked up power balance. And he would have these classes. Well, first of all, he was fucking all his female students, of course, because it was the 70s and he was gross. But his whole thing was that writing is a form of seduction. And so all the writers, especially if you went to an MFA program, the teachers that we were taught by all grew up really saturated with this Gordon Lish propaganda and way of talking about things. And so fiction as a form of seduction is definitely an idea that was very much part of what I was taught writing was about. And I have struggled with it. I on the one hand, like, that is, you are trying to compete with the real world. Like, when you're writing, you have to be entertaining and enchanting enough that someone keeps reading instead of dealing with the dog or whatever else is going on in the room. You have to, when they set down that book, you have to have made it enticing enough that they then are willing to pick it back up again. And so you are constantly aware of trying to seduce the reader. And that is a huge part of what the art of writing is. I didn't originally think that was going to be part of this book. It's just that I was doing a bunch of, free writing. I have to write a lot in order to figure out who the characters are and what the plot is kind of going to be before I let myself write something that would be like called chapter one. And I'm one of those writers who, I think all writers have one that's slightly more natural to them, first or third person. And for me, it's always been first person, and doing someone's voice, doing how they see the world. That's like, character is my favorite part of writing. And it's the part that's most natural to me. Plot, I've had a lot harder time learning. I've had to like learn it very systematically because it's not native to me as a storyteller. And so I've always been first person, but it's sort of like, how you want whatever kind of hair you don't have. Like, if you have stick straight hair, you wish you had curly hair and blah, blah, blah. So I always wanted to be the kind of writer who wrote in third person because that seemed very like fancy and like Russian to me, like Tolstoy, like, And like that's what a real writer would write like. And so I was like, this is going to be it. This is the book that I figure out third person. So I was writing all these sections in first and third person just to understand how they worked. Like, what are all the levers in the cockpit? What can't I do in third that I'm doing in first? And so I would transpose one from the other. So I'm thinking about this. And then I'm understanding that her dad's going to be in it and he's a wrestler, and that it's going to be about his persona and kayfabe, and that it's going to be her persona on OnlyFans. And then I'm realizing like I'm putting on the Margo mask just as clearly as she's putting on the Hungry Ghost mask, or Jinx is kayfabing as Jinx. Like there is this direct parallel that these things are alike. And so then I thought, what if I could use switching between first and third to draw attention to the artifice of the narrative itself, and make that, because like I don't like to have like a message, in part because like I read Ayn Rand in high school. Because do you guys remember that like there was like a essay competition that if you wrote an essay on Atlas Shrugged, you could win $10,000 like for a college scholarship? So I was like gonna enter this, and I tried reading Atlas Shrugged and I hated it so fucking much. And it just like I literally, it's the only book I've ever thrown across a room in despair. But because she basically, I just, it made me realize that novels are a rigged game. You can, because you're deciding everything that happens in a novel, if you have an ideological viewpoint, you can just set up everything to support your own point of view. And philosophically, this makes the novel kind of like bankrupt as a form, because all the evidence, it's like writing a scientific paper, but you made up all the data. You know, it's like, how do you ever say anything meaningful in the novel? And this really bothered me. You can tell what kind of pedantic nerd I was from the fact that this is what I was thinking about in high school. But so I kind of like found a way out of this through Dostoevsky, of all people, where I was like, no, you can just like put different viewpoints in, and then you just let them talk to each other, and you don't have to decide. You just put everything next to each other and it casts shadows, and the reader can see, oh, this shape is similar but different than this shape, that these things. And so kind of, I think what I try and do is find patterns or likenesses in different things, and then get them in the same room together so that they'll sort of become in conversation with each other. And so that's sort of what I tried to do with this idea of like the artificiality. Like, you know, it's normal to think that like lying is a bad thing, but of course, like I also lie for a living. Like that's my whole job, is to make things up, right? And so like I also like really love artificiality, and believe that it has fun potential in it that reality doesn't have. And so I was like, how can I write like a defense of the false, of falsity itself? And I think especially as a big fan of drag, I was like already, and like, because drag was how I got into wrestling. And so all of this like made sense to me. And so putting these things sort of in conversation with each other made sense to me.
I'm so glad you're bringing up wrestling, because
Oh yeah.
that is quintessential. His argument that it's predetermined, just like a ballet is, just like
Yes.
a novel is. So does that make
Yes.
it fake? And I love that analogy. It's just perfect. And so tell us about wrestling, your love of
How I
wrestling.
got into wrestling. Okay, so you can imagine being raised by a single mom and my grandma. We were not watching a lot of WWE. It was all like musicals and Shirley Temple films in our household. So I didn't grow up a wrestling fan, but my husband did, and he kind of grew up the whole Hulk Hogan, say your prayers and take your vitamins, Hulkamaniac, and then stayed a fan through you know, Degeneration X and the Attitude Era and all of that. And he started putting it on at the beginning of the pandemic. We just gotten a trampoline, and all the boys wanted to do was watch wrestling and then wrestle on the trampoline. And so I think he was hoping that the kids would fall in love with it, but it was me that fell in love with it. I got obsessed. And part of it, I think, really was drag. I'm being such a big fan of drag, I immediately saw these ridiculous outfits and I was like, oh, we're dressing up weird and being catty with each other. Love it. Like, give me more of it. Like, and there's something just so campy about the whole aesthetic of wrestling that I really like. Like, I love how, like, there's like, oh, he's like so serious. He's the Undertaker. And there's like all these like almost like magical elements. And then you have like, oh, I'm just a shredded buff dude on a lot of roids, and then you have like a guy with a sock puppet. You know what I mean? Like, it's like a crazy group project where everybody's doing their own thing and none of it matches. And I love that like homemade feeling about it. Like I love the dorkiness like of the aesthetics of wrestling. I found immediately really appealing. And then I started just watching wrestling. And then I started watching Vice's Dark Side of the Ring series, like while I was folding laundry, which is, they're great. They're 20-minute episodes where they just like tell you biographical information about a particular wrestler or moment in wrestling history. And that's when I kind of started to understand a little bit more about what the actual life of a wrestler is like. And that's when I discovered that wrestling has a rich literary tradition, where almost every wrestler has published, if not one, if not multiple, then at least one memoir. And because I think that because of kayfabe and the fact that things are often at work, there's a real hunger in wrestling fandom to find out what really happened, to get behind the scenes access. And so it's led to all of these memoirs, and they're fucking amazing. They're so good. And like the anecdotes are insane. You know, like I know like three different anecdotes about Haku's taking out someone's eye, you know, like, and so it's just like catnip for a fiction writer. So I'm like reading all these hungrily and telling my mom, we would walk the dogs together every day. And I'm just telling her endless stories about wrestlers like shitting themselves on planes. And she is like, if only you could work this into your book somehow. Like, I think thinking maybe that would like direct some of the flow of stories away from her so she wouldn't have to hear about it. And I was like, no, I don't want Margo to become a wrestler. Like, then that's like not the message that I'm trying to send at all. And being a wrestler would be much worse for a young mother than being on OnlyFans in terms of practical like life. And then I was like, oh, what if it was her dad? And I was so scared to write it. I didn't want to get anything wrong. I did so much research. I was so worried. But I could never, I couldn't have imagined what was going to happen with this book. And I'm glad that I couldn't, because if I'd known that actual pro wrestlers were going to read this book, I wouldn't have been too petrified to write it. You know, I was just trying to pass so that like someone who was a lifelong fan would think I did a good job. But then it was really fun. I got to go backstage at an AEW show and meet Paul White, who's the Big Show. I don't know if you guys know him. He's like 7 feet tall, 450 pounds, like a real giant of a man. And he was like, who do you know? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, do you know Bret? And I'm like, no, I don't know Bret Hart. Are you kidding? I like, but and he was like, you have to know somebody. And I'm like, no, I just read all your memoirs. You guys published all this stuff. Like nobody like
It's not a secret. It's out there.
Yeah, it's out there. Like I didn't know anybody. But so it was so fun meeting him because also he is a huge reader. There are so many wrestlers are huge readers because especially in the days before smartphones, you're spending all this time on, you know, airplanes and in cars and stuff. They all were reading because what else are you going to do? But also I found out that he's in a Dungeons and Dragons group with Jack Black. Can you even imagine anything more fun than being in that Dungeons and Dragons group? I would die.
That would be so much drama. It would be so much fun.
I mean, Jack Black playing Dungeons and Dragons is like the coolest thing that I can even imagine.
Yeah, like just record that for OnlyFans.
Yeah, I would subscribe to the OnlyFans that's just watching their D&D battles. I really would.
Well, I love that you brought wrestling into it, and I assumed you were a lifelong fan as well.
I mean, I continue to be like I just didn't know about it.
Now it's in your blood. Like you're
Oh,
right.
I can't go back now. We dress up as wrestlers for every Halloween. I wanted to be Paul Bearer this year because like I'm kind of at my chubbiest and my hair is dark, and I was like, this is my perfect time to be Paul Bearer. If you don't know, I wish that I could put in the chat or something a picture of Paul Bearer because it's not funny if you don't know who that is. But he, anyway, we wound up being one year, me and my husband went as Hulk Hogan from two different time periods, and we took like fun pictures of us making out both dressed as Hulk Hogan. It's like a fun little, it's really revived Halloween for me. I never really liked Halloween until we started dressing up as wrestlers.
Yeah, it just makes it. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and talk about this book. I mean the cover.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is supposed to be a rug, but do you know what I think it reminds me of? The composition notebooks, which
It
is
does,
so
yeah.
perfect. It's so perfect for Margo. It's,
That makes so much sense. I hadn't thought that consciously, but that's exactly what it reminds me of too.
yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know, it just like that's where my brain went. And like she has her hand on it, and then the past part, I don't know. I just thought it was fabulous. This designer, like I love this
I
art.
know. I really like, I have switched publishers for this book, and it's been the most incredible experience with them. And they let me have so much more input in the cover design. And like they were like, make a Pinterest board of all your favorite covers. And I was like, okay, I have like, I think that because I thought a lot about it, because like it's hard to get across both that the book is going to be kind of weird and dark and edgy, and that it's going to be fun.
Right.
And I was like, I think the way to do that is like retro comic book vibes, like line drawing. Like, I think that that's the way you can kind of like going back to even like, I mean, I think about her as a superhero, even though she doesn't have like superhero powers. Like, that was where the idea for her kind of came from for me. And so they found like this incredible, like they found me multiple illustrators, but once I saw Nicole Rifkin's work, I was like, she's the only option.
Wow.
Um, and then I got to be part of like every step of the way, like her different drawings of different ideas that she had, and it was just such a fun experience.
Well, you're going to be super stoked to answer all these rapid fire questions, just like the artwork with your publisher. Are you ready for this?
Yes.
Okay. Arby's or In and Out?
Okay, truthfully, In and Out. Everyone's really disappointed that Arby's isn't my guilty pleasure. My guilty pleasure, I think, is even more embarrassing. And it is
What
Panda
is it?
Express. I
What?
Panda Express. Like if I am very sick or I am sad or something, my husband will get me Panda Express. And it's like it's even more uncool somehow than Arby's, but I wanted to
Yeah. It
just
doesn't even have as
ways.
much of a retro vibe.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to keep going. Wings or steak?
Oh, wings, sorry. I mean, I love wings.
Pomegranates or figs?
Pomegranates.
Do you have an aversion to seafood?
No, I don't.
Okay. Are you a face or a heel?
I mean, I think that I am a heel.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know.
Would you say strength or stubbornness?
Oh, stubbornness.
Who's your favorite wrestler?
Mick Foley.
And what's your favorite wrestling move?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I mean, I love all the like high flying stuff like Ricochet does. I think that or like the stink face. Okay, I'm gonna say the stink face. I'm gonna say Rikishi's stink face is my favorite wrestling move.
All right, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to reader questions. Alex looks like she is ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and get you to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. Hi, Rufi.
Hi.
So nice to have you here. I feel so grateful. Like, thank you, Laura Beth. And yeah, I'm just so happy. This book means so much to me. And I have two pretty long-winded, but I'm gonna try to be clear and concise. I'm not a writer, so me with my words is a bit more messy. But one question I have is I'm a pretty spiritual person, and my dog is named Bodhi. Like, I just feel, though I don't know so much about your spiritual life, that obviously you have some like spiritual tendencies, and you even mentioned spirituality in this chat. I kind of wonder what your spirituality is like and how you chose the name Bodhi. I know from Bodhisattva, but like what, there was not much other spiritual things in the book, although I think I'm always very drawn to spiritual writers, even though this isn't like a Buddhist book or anything. I feel like the ability to really see yourself in every person, as you mentioned in your writing style as well, like it really shines through. This is such, the characters are so delicious and so real. And so, yeah, I wonder how spirituality plays a role in your life and therefore as well into your writing.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so part of the reason I wound up naming him Bodhi was there was something that felt right about it because there's something so like okay, so full disclosure, I know four different little boys named Bodhi.
Oh, it's popular these
It's
days.
popular. And it's like every woman thinks that she's making this like entirely unique, deep spiritual choice, you know? But it's like, so there's part of it that just felt like correct about that to me
Yeah,
because like they each
yeah.
were making this incredibly individual choice. It's just that we're not all very different from each other, you know?
No,
And you're
yeah.
part of your generation and you're part of your society and your culture and all of its values and you get exposed to the same things that other people get exposed to. I think that I kind of grew up in like a post-Christian hippy dippy sort of spiritual family. So like we went to church when I was little, but it was like mainly for the singing. Um, and it wasn't very, I don't know, my mom was like just as invested in getting my natal chart done and like thinking about astrology as she was thinking about Jesus. And I think I found a lot more. I got very, I mean, I'm very interested in sort of like the history of religion. And like anthropology in general is kind of an interest for me, and just and archaeology and just understanding like deep, hominid origins. And so I think that I am like a very spiritual person, but I don't really belong to any particular viewpoint. I think that for me, ethics and trying to understand what to do with bad behavior has sort of always, it's one of those abiding artistic
Mhm.
questions for me. I came from a family where my grandparents were really severe alcoholics, and like my mom kind of grew up in like a nightmare childhood, like really bad abuse. And so that was sort of like my version of Grimm's fairy tales. Was like hearing all these stories from my mom and trying to understand like how that could have happened. Like, why would an adult want to have sex with children? You know, like that was like a thing that like 8-year-old Rufi was like, doesn't
Mhm.
add up, like why does that happen? And how do we let it happen? And then what do we do with people once they have behaved badly? Prison sucks. It doesn't really help make people not commit more crimes. If anything, it makes them commit more crimes. I think that we have like a real double think as a society. And Knockout Queen is like very explicitly about this. My book before
Mhm.
Margo is like, what do you do when someone you love does something bad?
Yeah.
And I think that we have this real deep conflict as a society between like an older version of punishment, an intuitive understanding that punishment is necessary in order for things to be fair, and also an understanding that punishment doesn't, it makes maybe the person who was originally wronged feel better, and it stops blood feuds. I mean, that's what it's originally for, is to keep people from just eye for an eyeing each other into chaos.
Mhm.
But it doesn't do anything to rehabilitate people and propagate any kind of like actual social good in terms of making people more functional or being able to reenter society. And so it feels to me like that's something that we're going to need to really deal with in the next 20 years. Especially in California, our private prison situation has gotten really out of control, and it's really scary. It's sort of like where prison intersects capitalism, you can just be assured that nothing ethically correct is going to happen. So
Yeah.
I think I sort of found myself as a spiritual being in considering those kinds of ethical questions that were
Beau-
just part of my own childhood, kind of.
Beautiful.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much for that, Alex. I really appreciate it.
Can I ask one more? If I can
Yeah,
also wait
go,
till the
go for
end.
it. Yep.
If there's other people, I can wait till the end 100%.
No,
No,
just go
no
ahead.
one has their hand up, so go ahead.
Okay, because I loved how you spoke about how character was the most interesting or maybe most natural thing for you in writing, especially in the terms of how this is going to become a series. And as an actor, I just have to think about like what that means for your role in crafting the characters that are going to be seen on the in the film landscape and lens. Like I can't imagine being able to like do that. Like if I were you, like if character is like my most important thing, like yes, you've gotten incredible actors who are going to do amazing no matter what, but obviously your vision is the most specific. And how I
Oh,
don't
you
know.
have to let go. I mean, I think especially it makes it a lot easier that it's a series because to me, when you do an adaptation, there's a one-to-one relationship between a novel and a movie kind of, but once it's a series, it has to become its own thing, you know,
Yeah,
and those characters are gonna change and they're gonna, and so
they
I'm
have to grow.
an
Yeah,
executive producer, so I've been able to give notes on all the scripts, but I'm not in charge of writing them. And I feel like that was important because I would just make it the book again. But I think
yeah,
it has to be allowed to become a new thing, you know, and I really trust their vision for it. And also, like, if it sucks, you know, I don't feel like that ruins the book. Like,
yeah.
you know what I mean?
No,
Like that's the beauty of getting to be a fiction writer is like, I don't have to compromise ever. I get to make it all exactly how I want it. It's like a perfectionist dream. You get to just go in the sandbox and no one can touch your toys. And you're just like all alone in there making your perfect little imaginary world.
Your book is your OnlyFans account.
Yeah, it is. But it's also like it just screams only child. I feel like it has to be that a disproportionate number of fiction writers are only children. Because like there is some sort of like I just I think for me, I was just like I was a very socially awkward fat little girl who didn't have a lot of friends who read too many books, and that's how I became a writer. I don't know how anyone becomes I don't know why you would become a writer otherwise,
No
really.
such thing as reading too
Yeah.
many books. I will
Um
say.
but
I can't wait to see it. I'm so excited. And
Yeah.
even if it is exactly like the book, it will be amazing. And if it's different, it will be
yeah.
amazing.
Well,
I'm
I'm so excited. The casting of Jinx, I was like, this is a big, you know, who is it going to be? And when they went with Nick Offerman, he wasn't someone that I had thought of, but I was like, oh my God, this is perfect because he just has the ability where you like really believe he could break someone's hand and that he could bounce a baby and make a lasagna. Like he has that perfect balance between the masculine and feminine kind of. I
and
think
the humor is gonna shine through in the perfect. It's
Yeah.
gonna be amazing.
I
Yeah.
can't wait. Well, thank you, Alex. I'm going to go to Amy and let her ask a question. There you go, Amy.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. This has been amazing. I also can't wait for the TV show. Also can't wait for your next book that comes out. Is there anything that you can share about what's to come?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm writing my next book now, and um, it's a thriller, which I've never done before, and it is like really fun to have that much plot and that much like suspense. And so like it's like I want it to be like high octane crack. Like I want you to be like, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." But trying to find ways of like balancing the humor with the fear is really kind of interesting and fun, and I'm still figuring that out. But so the basic world that it's set in, it is set in the world of extremely competitive Little League. I live in a town that just won the Little League World Series a couple years ago. It is a baseball obsessed town. Both my sons play baseball. They were both pitchers. And how seriously the parents take baseball is absolute insanity. And also, I didn't grow up playing sports. And so to me, all of it is just like fascinating and baffling. Like the way that like all the dads suddenly cosplay like they're in the 1920s. Like you've seen these same dads at soccer practice, right? And they don't at all. And then they get to baseball practice and they're like, that a boy, nice, seen it? You know, and they're all talking like they're in the 20s. It's the most ridiculous thing. And I'm like, oh, that's what baseball is. It's like a form of male cosplay, you know? And like there's so much weird melancholia in baseball. Anyway, so it's set in the world of Little League Baseball. The main character is like a baseball mom. Um, but there are also, she basically winds up embroiled in like a big CIA plot. And there's time travel elements which it sounds so bad. It's like I just have this ability to put too many things in the pot, and like you hope it works, you know, like I believe it will work in the book, but it sounds like a bad idea. Like just the way that this book sounds like too many things, too many conflicting tastes in one dish. I know it sounds bad to have time travel, CIA, and Little League Baseball in one book, but I think it's gonna work.
Well, I can't wait. Thanks so much for asking that, Amy, because I
Thank you.
have a timeline for this. Like, it just
I
when
mean,
we
I'm hoping to finish a first draft this year,
okay.
and then hopefully, sell it. So like I would imagine like maybe 2026, 2027, somewhere in there. I think
Cool.
the show will probably wind up being 2026 as well.
Okay. Awesome. Erica has a question. Go ahead.
Thank you. Around that same topic, I was just wondering, Rufi, how long it takes you to write a book on average. And then when you're in the middle of writing a book, what's like a day in a life for you?
Yeah, okay. So it really depends. I have to think about something for a really long time before I can start writing because otherwise I don't know where the beginning is or how to set up all the dominoes kind of. And so there's like a whole period of pre-writing that can be anywhere from like 3 months to a year, depending on how my projects have overlapped. So like with this one, I'm really only starting writing now, but I've been doing all this publicity for like the last year for Margo. And so I've been doing nothing but thinking about it. So when I started writing, I could kind of just go. But so in general, if I have like, if it's not the pandemic and I don't have two kids home all the time, then it takes me about a year. If when I had two kids home all the time, it was like 2 years and I had to like, I would just take a weekend and go lock up myself up in a hotel with an extra large pizza. And my husband would watch the kids and I'd just spend 48 hours like writing as fast as I could and then come back. And, because it's really hard, especially when you're in the middle to the last third of a book you need long stretches of time. It's not really possible to like write in like an hour chunk. So like I was getting up at 4 a.m. and writing from 4 to 6, but I wasn't able to do like big revisions or big picture stuff writing in that small a chunk. So like I usually need 5 to 6 hours is a good working session for me. And I can't really write for longer than 6 hours. I tend to like become insane. So I'm one of those writers. I know lots of writers that like to write sitting up at a desk or like in a cafe with other people. I cannot do this. I need to be completely feral. I need to be in my pajamas. I need to be laying down in bed. I need to have like the same coffee that I've reheated 17 times in the microwave so it has like a gummy film over the top of it. The worse the house looks, the more comforted my husband and he's like, "Ooh, you're doing well. Everything is dirty." Like it gets really because I think I like revision time more because then you can like start to see it actually becoming polished and becoming good. But that process of like making it all up for the first time is really like it involves like basically being asleep while you're awake in order to like render all that. So you get real weird. Like I was like showing up to pick up my kids at school being like, okay, act normal. Like it would feel like I just had an acid trip or something. And then I'm like, don't know the other mother's names. And I'm like aware that I'm disheveled and I have like a big stain on the front of me, like, so it is, it's not a glamorous process.
Thank you for that view because you just see it right now. Well, I just appreciate you coming tonight and talking about it so just raw and giving us, that behind the scenes picture of what your books look like. I want to thank you so much for joining. Readers, I want to thank you for joining. Please make sure to check out her Instagram for the latest news. Obviously, I've asked if y'all could follow LB the Lover of Books on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and you'll find more reviews, more recommendations, and of course, more author chats. Next week, we're going to be discussing Nikki Erlich's The Measure. You probably have heard of this book. It's right there. It doesn't really need an introduction, but it's going to be obviously a spoiler-filled Zoom as well. And she's also going to introduce her new book, which is coming out, which was a big surprise. The Poppy Field. So that will be super exciting. And then a little bit later, we're going to talk to Linda Cohen-Loigman about The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern. And I'm going to give you a little bit more details on that one. Shelby Van Pelt said it's a sparkling ode to second chances. On the cusp of turning 80, a newly retired pharmacist, Augusta Stern, is adrift, and she's moving to an active senior community in Florida. And when she crosses paths with a delivery boy from her father's old pharmacy. And broke her heart. Now what's going to happen? So I'm excited to talk to her about that. I hope you'll read that one and join as well. I believe that was also a book of the month. So I hope everybody can join in, but it's just been a delight. I'm so excited. I have so many, like I was showing y'all, like I didn't even get to like a quarter, like this whole narrative, like giving us a writing lesson within the book. Like it just was awesome. I loved all of it. It was like nothing else I've ever read, which I think I really appreciate. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been so much fun. What a cool community you've like built here.
Well, I just want to say thank you for performing Sanity for us, because I think you did mention that. And we now have fallen in love with your art, whether or not we should be, but I have. I just, as you can tell from everyone gushing, it's just been a phenomenal read. And I can't wait to hear what's going to come up between baseball and CIA and how you link those.
Oh my God. It's the research for that one has been really fun. And I've gotten just obsessed with umpires. What a weird group of people.
Have you crossed paths with the Savannah Bananas yet?
Oh yeah. No, big Savannah Bananas fans in this house. Are you kidding?
All right. Well, good night, everybody. I hope everybody's had a great start to 2025. I know that I was so excited for you to be our first author this year, and enjoy your Raw tomorrow for wrestling.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
Good night, everybody. I'll see y'all in a week.
Thank you, Laura Beth.
Bye-bye.